The checkup that stopped the ward. The clinic on Starborn Station 8 floated in silent rotation above a silver planet where the oceans shimmered like mirrors, and the gravity was half that of Earth. The medical bay was run by species from 10 different worlds, each proud of its own methods of care. Among them was Atri, a young nurse from an aquatic race called the Solari, who breathed both air and water through a soft collar of gills. She was gentle and quick and known for her calm voice that could lower the pulse of any frightened patient that day. She met her first human. The patient arrived on a stretcher carried by 2 security drones. His uniform torn, his hair damp with sweat. His nameplate read, Mason Cole, human pilot. Earthborn. His file said mild concussion, possible muscle strain. Atri guided the stretcher into the scanner room and asked softly through her translator to please relax. She had never treated a human before, but the station database had provided reference charts. It should have been simple. When the scanner began its sweep, Atri watched the energy maps across her screen. Blue for calm, yellow for stress, red for damage. The readings pulsed smooth until something changed. A sudden red surge lit up the lower half of his body. It spread like a flare, and the circulation monitors spiked alarm. Atri's instincts took over. She had seen this before in Solari warriors during hemorrhage from deep tissue rupture. The scanner read it as vascular inflammation, dangerous and potentially lethal. Her voice turned sharp, calling for medical alert. She leaned close and said, "Do not move, you are bleeding inside." Mason blinked, confused. What bleeding?" Where his translator fumbled, trying to match human slang to medical phrases, and instead said, "You are bursting internally, please remain still." The drones beeped emergency tones, the ward lights changed to amber, and medics rushed in carrying sealant packs and cooling gel. They thought the human was collapsing. Atri grabbed a plasma field generator to cut open the flight suit before rupture pressure built further. Mason stared in disbelief and tried to sit up, shouting, "Wait, it's not that. It's not injury, it's just a reaction." But the translator stuttered between words and turned his protest into, "I'm excited by internal temperature." The sentence froze the entire ward. Silence heavier than gravity filled the room. Atri hesitated, her frills shifting, pale confusion mixing with duty. She thought the human was delirious from pain. The chief medic over the intercom asked status. Atri said strong vascular reaction, unidentified cause, possible reproduction organ involvement, recommend immediate invasive pressure relief. The medic gasped and ordered full sedation. Mason flailed. "No, wait, that's not what it means." His cheeks burned bright and he covered his face with his hand. Before anyone could proceed, the door slid open, and a senior Starborn liaison officer stepped in, a thin figure with metal eye lenses that shimmered with knowledge filters. He asked what was happening. Atri answered, "Urgent male internal swelling near base of torso indicating burst vessel." The officer blinked twice and then sighed heavily. Understanding dawned, he dismissed the alert drones and waved off the surgery team. "Stand down," he said calmly. "This is not an injury. This is a biological reaction, typical of human males under emotional or chemical stimulus. It is not fatal. It is not even unusual." Atri froze, her voice soft but trembling. "Are you saying this condition is voluntary or normal?" The officer nodded. "It is called arousal. It serves reproductive purposes, not pathology." Mason groaned from the bed, wishing the floor would open and swallow him. Atri's skin shimmered blue-green. The celery color of shame. She deactivated the scanner and whispered a long apology in her language, which the translator softened into, "I did not wish to wound your dignity." Mason managed a weak laugh, saying, "It's fine, really. I'd rather have a nurse overreact than underreact." The ward slowly returned to calm. The other medics dispersed, pretending to check equipment, but most were hiding smirks. Atri focused on closing the record. She adjusted the report, marking it as false alarm, but every line burned with humiliation. She had acted on instinct, not understanding Mason. Noticed her shoulders drop, her usually smooth breathing turned uneven. He sat up and said gently, "You saved lives before, right? You acted because you care. Don't feel bad for that." She looked at him uncertain, her large silver eyes reflecting the light, and said, My error could have led to invasive procedure. Your species must think me unfit. Mason shook his head. Humans make worse mistakes, daily. The senior officer advised both of them to attend cross-species medical training before further interactions. He left shaking his head and muttering about translators needing better filters when the door closed. Silence lingered between nurse and patient. Finally, Mason chuckled quietly and said, "So that's first contact between Solari and humans memorable." At least Atri blinked in confusion, and then her gills rippled in what her kind used for laughter. A soft fluttering sound like bubbling water, she said. "If this is normal for humans, I must revise many protocols." He smiled, saying, "Please do. But maybe keep that report between us," she promised in solemn tone, sealed under medical privacy code. Outside the viewport, the silver planet spun slowly and the clinic lights dimmed to rest cycle. Atri filed her report and hesitated over the section marked, "Lesson learned," she wrote in plain words next time. "Understand before acting." And under that, she added, "Human body, unpredictable, proceed." With humor, Mason signed his discharge form and left the ward still red-faced but grateful. As he passed through the door, he heard Atri practicing the human phrase he used earlier. "It's fine, really." And though the translator softened it, her tone carried warmth that made him smile and think, maybe misunderstanding was the first step toward friendship between their world's anatomy class. With hurt feelings, the next cycle began with the soft hum of the clinic lights returning to full brightness. Atri arrived early wearing her clean medical tunic, her mind still circling around the memory of the previous day. She could not stop replaying the moment when the red alert lights had flashed, and she had misread a simple biological reaction as a fatal crisis for a species she barely understood. She felt as though every whisper in the corridors carried her name. The nurse who panicked over human anatomy. Her gills fluttered nervously, and she took a deep breath, reminding herself that work must go on today. She was scheduled for a meeting with the cultural medical liaison, who had insisted that she and Mason attend a joint educational review to prevent future misunderstandings. Mason arrived a few minutes later, wearing a simple, dark flight shirt with his usual grin. Though it carried traces of embarrassment, his first words were, "Careful, morning nurse. No emergencies this time." I hope Atri's eyes widened slightly, as if she had not expected him to sound so light about it. She replied in her calm tone, "I have reviewed 261 pages of human anatomy since yesterday. I now understand far too much about your internal structures." Mason laughed nervously, saying, "Well, you probably know more than most humans now." She blinked once and said seriously, "That is worrying." The cultural liaison arrived carrying a data slate full of diagrams and cross-species medical charts. He was a Starborn hybrid, a blend of human and Kren body lines, sleek and expressionless. He spoke in precise tones. "This session will serve as corrective understanding for both species. Nurse Atri, your error was one of ignorance, not neglect. And Pilot Mason, your embarrassment was an unfortunate side effect of cross-cultural translation. Both of you will help us create a new guide for interspecies care protocols starting today." They sat together at a long table with the holographic projector in the center. When activated, it displayed a rotating human figure, transparent to reveal organs, veins, and neural lines. Atri studied it with fascination. Her mind absorbing details at rapid speed, she pointed at the lower region and asked quietly, "Why would a circulatory structure be positioned externally where it could be injured?" Mason coughed awkwardly and said, "Evolution took a strange path for us. We value cooling and function over protection." Atri tilted her head, saying, "Your species clearly values danger over comfort." Mason replied, "Maybe that's true." The liaison continued with clinical explanations describing hormonal chains and responses under stress, attraction, or fear. Atri took notes with careful claws scratching on her pad, her face calm but her gills flickering faster. Every time something seemed odd to her, she learned that the human nervous system could trigger physical changes just from emotion, that the same body could prepare for combat or affection with identical speed, that adrenaline and arousal sometimes overlapped. She found it both fascinating and unsettling. She whispered, "Your species lives so close to chaos and yet survives." Mason smiled. Humans thrive in chaos, that's our favorite element. As the lesson continued, they switched topics to language misinterpretation. The liaison displayed the transcript from the previous incident line by line, showing how the translator had turned Mason's words into disaster calls. It replaced his sentence, "It's nothing serious," with the phrase "critical internal burst," and replaced Atre's calm command hold. Still with the alarming emergency surgery preparation, the computer then learned from the false data and began to reinforce panic signals. The liaison said we must teach the translation core, the difference between metaphor humor and true distress. Humans speak in riddles and slang, which most translators treat as warnings. Mason added that humans also exaggerate feelings even when fine. Atre nodded, saying, "I now understand that when a human says they are dying, they might simply mean they are tired." Mason grinned. "Exactly. Now you are fluent." The meeting lasted long into the shift until the projector dimmed and the liaison dismissed them both. But before leaving, he asked them to collaborate further and prepare a live demonstration of calm cross-species communication for the staff next week. Mason agreed immediately, saying it might help Atre. Hesitated, unsure if she wanted that kind of attention again, but the idea of correcting her mistake drove her to nod. After the meeting, they walked through the quiet corridor, the hum of life support around them. Mason glanced sideways at her, saying, "You know, for what it's worth, you handled it better than I would have. If I'd thought someone was dying in front of me, I'd panic too." Atre looked at him with her soft silver eyes and replied, "I am trained to keep others alive. Panic should not exist inside me." He said, "Maybe, but caring always creates panic when it's real." She tilted her head, not understanding the meaning, so he added, "Sometimes fear proves that you care enough to act." They entered the observation deck where the viewport stretched across the black of space, showing the planet's glowing edge below them. Atre folded her hands and said, "In my culture, mistakes, 'cause deep mark we call it tide stain. It stays until another sees worth in you again." She turned slightly away as if embarrassed. Mason said, "Then let's erase it together. How about we make that training session the best thing this clinic ever saw?" She looked at him. Then slowly her frills shimmered a faint gold, the Solari color for cautious hope. She said, "I will try." Later that night, while Mason rested in his quarters, he received a message on his console from Atre. The translation header read Human Physiology Update version 2. Within the file was a detailed report correcting every misclassified signal from the scanner and adding a new section labeled Emotional Interference Patterns. His name was listed as data contributor. He smiled, reading her last note written in careful plain words. "Humans unpredictable, recommend laughter therapy for stress reduction." That small line made him laugh out loud. Atre, meanwhile, sat alone in the dim lab reviewing her work. She replayed recordings of human laughter. Her species did not laugh naturally, so she studied the sound like a song. The rhythm fascinated her. She tapped the counter softly, mimicking the beat, then whispered softly, "Humans, strange creatures of heat and noise. Yet somehow, they heal faster when they smile." She looked up at the starlight beyond the glass and whispered, "Maybe that is the true medicine." When the next cycle began, word spread through the clinic that the alien nurse and human pilot were preparing a lesson. For everyone, curiosity filled the halls. Some teased, others whispered, but beneath it all was respect for their willingness to face it openly. Atre walked to the prep room, feeling the familiar twist of nerves, yet this time it carried a spark of determination. Mason waited there, holding a cup of dark earth coffee, and said, ready to shock them again. She replied, "Perhaps this time we shock them with learning instead of alarms." And together they began to plan what would become the first cross-species medical seminar in the history of the Starborn Clinic. One born from misunderstanding but guided now by friendship, curiosity, and the stubborn will to understand each other fully, even when everything about them was different. Laughter is the best sedative. The morning began with the hum of the station blending into a quiet rhythm that Mason had started to recognize as a kind of heartbeat of its own. The Starborn Clinic had changed since the day of the incident. Now more humans came through its doors for treatment, and none of them flinched at the sight of alien medics. Atre moved through the halls with smoother confidence, Though the memory of her mistake still rested like a small shadow behind her eyes, she had promised to learn, and she meant it. Today was the first training day for mixed staff, and she and Mason were the ones leading it together. The preparation room was filled with screens, displays, and translation nodes. Mason stood at the center adjusting a small projector that showed scenes from Earth. He had chosen recordings from old human comedies, laughter echoes, and funny gestures that showed humor without needing translation. Atri entered holding her tablet, her tone calm and curious, saying, "These are teaching materials." Mason smiled, saying, "Yes, because you are about to learn the most powerful human medicine, laughter." She blinked slowly, her gills fluttering in mild confusion. "I have studied the human body in detail since our last session, but found no gland that produces laughter." He chuckled. "That's the point. It doesn't come from a gland, it comes from connection. When people laugh together, pain becomes smaller. Fear fades." Atri listened closely, trying to absorb every word as if it were data. The first test group entered, a mix of nurses, engineers, and a few curious patients. Mason started the projector, and a small figure appeared on the screen, slipping on a wet surface and spinning dramatically before landing harmlessly in a puddle. The room filled with bursts of laughter from the humans present. While the aliens looked on, puzzled, Atri frowned slightly, then turned to the data scanner on her wrist. It showed a clear drop in human stress signals and a small increase in oxygen intake. She said softly, "Your kind truly heals by confusion." Mason grinned. "It's not confusion, it's joy." She nodded slowly. "Perhaps same word, different sound." To balance the session, she decided to share something from her world. She activated a device that emitted a soft rhythmic tone, underwater frequencies translated into vibration. The floor and walls began to hum gently at first, then build into a layered pulse. It felt like a heartbeat and song mixed together. Mason felt his muscles loosen. The room seemed calmer. Even the laughter subsided into smiles. Atri explained on Salar, "We call this pulse calm. It is our form of medicine to remind the body it is safe when chaos comes." Mason listened, eyes half closed, saying, "It feels like the ocean." She nodded. "That is where I was born." He looked at her and said, "Maybe we just found a way to merge them." They decided to combine both their methods, the rhythmic pulse from Atri's culture and the humor from Mason's heritage. They called it harmony therapy. And the idea was simple: treat fear and pain, not just with tools, but with emotions working together. Over the next hours, they tested their theory. Atri ran the scanners, monitoring heart rate and blood chemistry, while Mason told short, funny stories about Earth, like the time a human astronaut tried to drink water in zero gravity and ended up chasing floating bubbles through the cabin. Atri's gills rippled with faint color. That was the Solari version of laughter. The staff noted reduced tension and improved recovery speed among patients who participated. It began to look like more than a theory. When the data was compiled, the chief medic called them both to present it to the Starborn Health Council. Mason was relaxed, confident, but Atri was tense again for her. This was not just a presentation, it was redemption. They stood side by side in the large chamber where representatives of several species observed from their raised seats. Mason started by describing how human humor evolved as a survival tool to handle danger and stress. Atri followed, explaining that Solari rhythm therapy worked by aligning body signals and reducing panic responses. When combined, they created a synchronization effect in mixed teams, enhancing communication and trust. The council listened carefully, taking notes. During the demonstration, Mason made an unplanned joke about aliens, misunderstanding humans again. The crowd of humans laughed, while the alien side looked confused. Atri stepped in, raising a finger. She said clearly to laughter, "You must listen with your heart, not your translator." Then she began the low hum of her ocean rhythm, filling the room. The human laughter slowly softened, and the aliens began to feel the resonance. The two sounds blended, strange yet peaceful. The council leader, a towering insectoid being, finally nodded, saying, "Emotion. Synchronization has measurable effect. This method shall be noted for further trial." Atri's eyes shimmered with pride, though she kept her tone humble, saying thank you. Later that evening, after the council session, Mason and Atri returned to the observation deck. They looked out at the stars, the silver planet below, reflecting the light of the station. Mason leaned against the railing, saying, "You were incredible out there." Atri replied, "I was nervous. Every breath felt like failure waiting to happen, but when you laughed, it changed the air. It made me feel brave." He smiled. "That's the secret. Laughter is bravery disguised as foolishness." She tilted her head in curiosity, saying, "That is a strange definition." He shrugged. "Maybe, but it works." They stood in silence for a while, the hum of the engines steady around them. Then Atri asked softly, "Do all humans hide fear behind laughter?" Mason thought for a moment and said, "Most of us do, because if we laugh at the thing that scares us, it loses power." She considered that carefully, saying, "Then humans have turned weakness into strength." Mason nodded. "Exactly, and maybe the rest of the galaxy could learn something from that." As the cycle closed, Atri wrote her new report titled Harmony Trial Phase 1. She described every detail scientifically, but at the end, she added a simple personal note. Understanding between species begins not with logic, but with shared emotion. Meanwhile, Mason sent a message to Earth Command describing how an alien nurse had taught him to breathe in rhythm with the stars. He ended his report with one-line laughter and calm, two sides of the same medicine. The story of the clinic began spreading across the station. Some called it the comedy cure, others the pulse experiment. But everyone remembered who started it: the human who turned a misunderstanding into a miracle, and the nurse who turned shame into science. By the next dawn, the ward was full again. But something subtle had changed every time a new patient arrived, human or alien. Someone always smiled first, and someone always hummed the low rhythm of calm without even realizing it. And that was how laughter officially became the first shared language between worlds. The real emergency arrives. The Starborn clinic was quiet when the alarm began to sound, a deep pulsing vibration that echoed through the metal corridors and shook the transparent walls. The calm atmosphere vanished as the lights turned crimson, and the automated voice of the station declared incoming casualties from reactor accident in Sector 9. Medical teams report immediately. Atri was already moving before the second command finished. She grabbed her med kit, her gills fluttering in sharp bursts of focus. She had read the situation reports in training, but nothing prepared her for the reality of mass trauma under alien conditions. Mason was still in the recovery wing helping with equipment when he heard the call, and without thinking he ran after her. The first transport arrived, a freighter shuttle scorched along the hull, its airlocks dripping coolant fumes. The door opened and the smell of burned composite and blood filled the air. Medics rushed in carrying stretchers. 2 humans, 3 Kren, and 1 giant insectoid, all covered in radiation burns and chemical residue. Atri's calm rhythm that once filled the ward was replaced by the clipped tones of triage command, her voice steady as she directed the others. 1 breathing unstable. 1 neural shock. 1 cardiac arrest. She moved with precision, scanning and stabilizing fluids, her hands glowing faintly as the medical nanites in her gloves activated. Mason stood beside her, taking readings, translating human shouts for alien doctors and alien orders for human nurses. His training with her had paid off. The chaos grew as more victims arrived, some conscious and screaming, some silent, their suits fused to their bodies. The chief medic was still away handling an outbreak on another station, leaving Atri as acting lead. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing like gravity, but she did not let it break her. She looked to Mason and said firmly, "We will use the Harmony Protocol. Start rhythm pulse across the ward." His eyes widened. "You sure now with this many patients?" She nodded without hesitation. "Fear creates error. We must keep them calm." Mason ran to the main console, activating the rhythm wave that filled the clinic with low oscillating tones. The same sound Atri had once used to soothe individuals, now vibrating through the entire structure. At first, the human staff looked confused, but then, as the tone deepened, their heart rates dropped slightly. Panic turned into focus. Atri moved from bed to bed, applying the lessons of both species, one hand steadying a Solari patient's breathing pattern, the other sealing human burns with cool gel. They gave clear, simple commands, short words that transcended translation. When one patient began to convulse, she placed her hands on his shoulders and hummed directly into the air near his ear. The vibrations passed through skin to nerve, calming him. Mason noticed the effect and began repeating soft jokes between commands, not to entertain, but to keep attention focused on his voice. Each word grounding people to reality instead of fear. Then came the true crisis. The reactor engineer was brought in, barely conscious, his radiation levels critical, his heart flickering in and out of rhythm. The med scanner refused to read his vitals properly. Atri saw that his circulatory network was collapsing. She needed to replace a damaged vessel line using microcatheters and fluid injection. It was a precise procedure that required focus under clean, controlled conditions, but the ward was shaking from the arrival of more injured. She turned to Mason, saying, "I need your hands steady and your voice strong." He nodded. "I'm here, tell me what to do." The nurse guided him step by step together. They aligned the catheter through the damaged vessel. Mason kept talking to the patient while she worked, his voice soft and steady, describing calm oceans and quiet mornings back on Earth. The man's heartbeat steadied enough for her to complete the connection. She sealed the wound and breathed slowly, her gills folding back to rest. The patient survived, barely but alive, when she looked up. Mason was watching her with awe, saying, "I've seen pilots fly through fire, but that was something else," she replied in a voice that almost trembled. "You humans fly through fire every day. Perhaps this was my turn." The emergency continued for 6 more hours until every patient was stable or moved to quarantine. The ward was silent except for the hum of life support. Atri stood at the center, looking at the mess-scorched tools, broken scanners, but her expression was calm. She turned to Mason, who leaned against the wall, his uniform stained and torn. He asked, "Are we clear?" She nodded, all lives preserved except one minor drone operator lost before arrival. He looked away, whispering, "That's still a victory." She moved closer and said softly, "You carry every loss, don't you?" He nodded. "I guess we all do." As the cleanup began, the cultural liaison arrived, recording data for the report. He stopped when he saw Atri and Mason still standing near the last bed, his mechanical eyes glowing faintly. He said, "The council will hear of this response. Efficiency rating exceeds 90%. That has never happened before in cross-species emergencies." Atri lowered her head slightly, saying it was not numbers, it was rhythm and trust. He paused, then smiled, a rare thing for his kind, and said, "Perhaps those are the true metrics." Hours later, when the ward lights dimmed again, Atri sat on the floor near the empty bed, her body tired beyond measure. Mason joined her, holding 2 cups of rehydration fluid. He passed one to her and said, "You know, for someone who once thought a blush was a medical emergency, you've come a long way." She looked at him and replied, "Perhaps mistakes are the best teachers." He smiled, raising his cup to that. She asked softly, "Will they remember what we did, or will it fade when peace returns?" He answered, "They'll remember because they'll feel it every time that tone plays across the speakers, the sound of calm in chaos that's yours." Before leaving, she walked through the silent corridor, the red emergency lights now cool white again. Her steps echoed softly. She entered the observation deck, where the planet below gleamed silver and blue like liquid metal. She watched for a long time, thinking of the faces she had saved and the one she had not. She whispered a Solari phrase meaning, "May the tide carry you home." Mason joined her after a while, standing beside her without words, just the quiet company of understanding. They looked at the endless stars beyond, and both knew something had changed forever. They were no longer just a nurse and a patient. They were a team forged in crisis, united by rhythm, laughter, and the shared will to keep life alive, no matter how strange or different it looked. The next morning, the entire clinic received a message from command praising their performance and announcing that their methods would be reviewed for station-wide training. Atri read the message, then turned to Mason, saying, "Perhaps now the galaxy will learn that healing does not come only from machines." He smiled, replying, "Or from medicine." She nodded, "Maybe from both, and from hearts that choose not to give up, even when the world burns." And for the first time since she came to the station, she allowed herself to laugh freely at the memory of how it all began. One mistaken alert that started everything between blush and bravery. The days after the reactor disaster turned the Starborn Clinic into a legend across the station. Reports flowed in from other sectors asking for training on the Harmony method that Atri and Mason had created. New staff began arriving to observe the mixed human and alien team working together. Atri found herself leading briefings and explaining rhythm sequences to doctors twice her age, while Mason had been assigned officially as a liaison officer between Earth Medical Command and the Starborn administration. Neither of them had expected their friendship born out of an embarrassing misunderstanding to become the backbone of interspecies medicine, yet here they stood side by side guiding others through lessons of trust and emotion. But success never came without new challenges. The influx of patients from neighboring colonies brought new illnesses and new politics. Some alien cultures viewed humor as disrespect, and some human officers found it hard to follow the slow musical therapy that the Solari favored. Friction returned like heat under ice one night during a late shift. Atri and Mason sat in the empty cafeteria, both too tired to speak for a while. She stirred her drink absent-mindedly, her gills opening and closing with slow exhaustion. He looked at her and said quietly, "We are holding the station together." "One laugh at a time," she replied. "Sometimes laughter is not enough. Sometimes we need silence." He nodded, understanding that her calm came from rhythm, not words. A soft chime interrupted their quiet. A message from Central Command appeared on the screen. It was marked urgent. A new freighter convoy from the Outer Rim had been attacked by pirates and badly damaged. They were sending survivors to Starborn Station 8. Estimated arrival 6 hours. The list of injuries scrolled endlessly: burns, fractures, radiation poisoning. Atri closed her eyes for a moment, then rose without hesitation, saying, "We will prepare." Mason followed her through the halls, the same halls where they once panicked together now. Steady with purpose, they activated emergency protocols, restocked supplies, checked scanners, and briefed. The team this time she spoke not with fear but authority. When the transports arrived, the chaos began again, but this time the staff was ready. The ward pulsed with rhythm and coordination. Atri directed each team while Mason moved between stations, translating and motivating. But one transport carried something unexpected. Among the injured was a small alien child of a crystalline species rarely seen far from their homeworld. Their translucent body flickered weakly, like fading glass fractures spread across its limbs, and the med scanner failed to identify the internal structure. Atri crouched beside the stretcher, studying the alien carefully, and said softly, "This one cannot survive our standard treatments. Its molecular structure reacts to radiation differently." Mason asked, "Can we do anything?" She replied, "Maybe if we adapt the pulse therapy to molecular vibration instead of neural frequency." "It is untested," he said. "Then we test now." They moved the child into isolation, the room filled with low humming energy as Atri adjusted the tone to match the frequency she detected in the faint crystal glow. Mason watched the small body pulse in response. It began to resonate in harmony with the sound, but too strongly the energy spiked, threatening to shatter it. Atri closed her eyes and shifted pitch, humming softly with her own voice, blending natural tone with the machine. The resonance balanced, the light steadied, and slowly the fractures began to fuse. Mason stood motionless, barely breathing, afraid any sound might break the fragile miracle. After several long minutes, the child opened its eyes, 2 glowing shards of pale blue. The readings showed stability. Atri released the breath she had been holding. The rescue became the talk of the station once more, but she did not celebrate. Instead, she retreated to the quiet observation deck, staring at the stars. Mason found her there hours later, saying, "You saved a life again, and not just any life, an alien." "No one else even understood," she said quietly. "It was not me, it was sound and chance." He sat beside her, saying, "Maybe, but it was also your courage." She turned to him. Her voice soft. "Bravery feels different from the stories. It feels heavy." He smiled. "Bravery usually does." As the station settled back into routine, a different kind of problem began. Rumors. Some staff whispered that the Harmony Protocol was dangerous, too emotional, too human. They said emotions made doctors lose objectivity. Atri heard the whispers and carried them silently until Mason confronted her, saying, "You can't let them twist what we built." She answered, "If they fear emotion, they will never heal." He said, "Then let's show them what emotion can do. An opportunity." came sooner than expected during a council inspection. A malfunction in the station's power core triggered a localized gravity collapse in the maintenance ring. Several workers were trapped inside with life support. Failing Atri volunteered to lead the rescue team, and Mason insisted on going with her. They entered the twisting corridors, crawling through tilted floors and floating debris, the air thick with smoke and static. She used her rhythm scanner to track heartbeats, faint echoes. Through the metal, when they found the trapped workers, one was pinned under a beam bleeding badly. Another had lost consciousness from lack of oxygen. Mason lifted debris while she stabilized the wounded, but then the gravity flickered again and the ceiling cracked above them. Atri shoved Mason aside as debris fell, striking her shoulder. She winced but continued working. The injured worker stirred weakly. Mason saw blood seeping from her arm and said, "You are hurt." She shook her head. "No time. Stabilize him first together." They patched oxygen lines and injected nanofluid into the victim's bloodstream. When the rescue drones finally arrived, they carried the survivors out first. Mason turned to help her, but she insisted, "Go, I will follow." A final piece of ceiling broke loose and crashed near her, trapping her leg. He ran back instantly, pulling with all his strength until she was free. They stumbled out together as the corridor sealed behind them. Outside, the medics rushed to treat her wound. She brushed them away, saying others first, but Mason forced her to sit, saying, "You always forget you count too." She tried to speak, but her voice trembled, the adrenaline fading, replaced by fatigue. He held her steady until the bleeding stopped, and said softly between blush and bravery, "I think you've mastered both." She gave a faint laugh that rippled like waves across her gills, saying, "Perhaps that is your influence." Later that night, when she woke in recovery, Mason sat nearby reading her medical report. He smiled and said, "Everything looks good, you'll heal fast." She asked, "Why are you still here?" He replied, "Because someone has to make sure the nurse follows her own rules." She smiled quietly, saying, "Then stay until the rhythm steadies." They sat together in silence, listening to the hum of the clinic machines that no longer sounded mechanical, but alive outside the viewport. The stars shimmered bright and endless, reminding them both that courage was not absence of fear. It was action, despite it, and that sometimes healing came not just from medicine but from connection and care, born between two very different hearts, rumors, protocols, and a test of trust. The events of the rescue had spread beyond the station within a single rotation. Every medical network across the Starborn systems was talking about the human and the Solari nurse who had saved lives with rhythm and emotion. Some called it revolutionary, others called it reckless. Atri felt the shift in the air every time she walked through the corridors. People stopped talking when she passed. The whispers were not cruel but cautious. She knew that change frightened those who built their pride on precision. Mason noticed too. He stood by her through every briefing and inspection, but even his laughter could not drown out the weight of politics that now pressed around them. The Starborn Health Council decided to evaluate the Harmony Protocol under official conditions. They sent inspectors representatives from 6 species known for strict adherence to logic and discipline. Atri spent sleepless nights preparing the data sets, calibration models, and safety metrics, while Mason rehearsed explanations in plain speech because he knew that numbers alone would never capture what their method truly meant. On the morning of the inspection, the clinic gleamed spotless, every bed aligned, every monitor synced, yet beneath the clean surface tension pulsed like static. When the council members arrived, the air itself seemed to freeze. The lead inspector was a towering reptilian called Dr. Vesker, whose voice carried authority sharp as steel. He addressed them both in formal tone. "Nurse Atri, pilot Mason, your cooperation has drawn interest and concern in equal measure. We are here to determine if your emotional-based therapy meets safety standards or if it will be banned across all medical stations." Atri bowed her head respectfully, saying, "We understand. Our only wish is to share a tool that saved lives," Vesker replied. "Then you will demonstrate it live, and any error will be recorded as evidence." The room filled with observers, technicians, and recording drones. Atri stood at the console, her hands steady, though her heart raced. Mason beside her adjusted the translation grid so everyone could hear her rhythm while understanding the words. She began softly explaining how human laughter and Solari pulse could synchronize bioelectric stability across species. She played the opening tone, a low hum that, built in slow waves. Mason added his voice, telling a short story about Earth humor, about how astronauts once drew faces on equipment to stay sane during isolation. The humans in the room smiled. The aliens watched curiously. The rhythm scanners showed lowered tension levels and stable vitals among volunteers. Then something changed. One of the inspectors, a smaller avian creature with thin metallic feathers, leaned toward his console, tapping discreetly. He sent false data into the scanner system. The holographic readings on the main display suddenly flared red, showing dangerous spikes. It appeared that the therapy was triggering violent biological reactions. Vesker raised his voice, saying, "Your method destabilizes physiology. Explain this." Atri froze, confusion flashing through her as she checked her instruments, but her instincts whispered that the readings did not match the rhythm she could hear. She stepped forward and placed her hand over the table, feeling the vibration of the air. Then she looked directly at the avian inspector and said, "The data is false. The rhythm is pure." The entire room went silent. Vesker demanded proof. She replied, calm, but firm. "Human pulse shows coherence, not chaos. The supposed spikes do not align. With breath intervals, watch Mason breathe, and you will see." Vesker observed the pilot's chest rising in perfect rhythm to the hum, while the false data continued to show erratic signals, clearly artificial. Mason turned to the avian inspector, saying, "Nice try. Next time, forge data that matches the rhythm." The council turned their gaze toward the culprit, who folded his wings in shame. Vesker signaled the security drones to remove him after the disruption. The test resumed, this time under full transparency. The data now showed undeniable results. Tension levels across all volunteers had dropped by 30%, heart rate variability improved, and stress hormones declined. Even the skeptical council members could not deny the evidence. Vesker finally spoke, his tone softer but still stern. "Your protocol is unconventional but effective under controlled conditions. Further testing will be authorized." Atri bowed deeply, saying, "Thank you." Mason added with a grin, "See, laughter really is contagious." Vesker looked at him, unamused but not hostile. "Perhaps among humans," he replied. When the council left, the staff broke into quiet celebration. Some clapped, others just sighed in relief. Atri stood still, letting the sound wash over her. Mason turned and said, "You did it again?" She shook her head, saying, "We did it always, we." Mason laughed. "You always share the credit," she answered, "because healing is never a solo act." He smiled, "Because you know what happens when one of us tries alone." She tilted her head. "What happens?" he replied. "Another red alert and the whole station panics." She laughed softly, the sound rippling like water. But peace never lasted long. That same evening, a transmission arrived from Earth. Command. They wanted Mason to return for debriefing and to share what he had learned about interspecies medicine. It was an honor. Yet he felt a twist of sadness. Leaving would mean ending the daily rhythm he had built with Atri. When he told her, she listened quietly, her expression unreadable. Then she said softly, "Humans always move forward. That is your way." He asked, "Will you miss me?" She looked at the stars beyond the glass and replied, "I will feel the absence in the rhythm that will be enough." He left 3 days later. The farewell brief. No speeches, no ceremony. Just a handshake that lingered too long, and a promise to send updates from Earth. She stood at the dock, watching the shuttle rise, her reflection fading in the glass. For the first time since she arrived on the station, the hum of the engines felt hollow, the rhythm unbalanced. She returned to the clinic, where the empty chair beside her desk reminded her of laughter and courage. Weeks passed, the Harmony program expanded through the network. But Atri felt its heart missing until one quiet cycle, the comm system flashed incoming message from Earth. She opened it, expecting a report. Instead, she heard Mason's voice recorded over the hum of an Earth hospital. He said, "Guess what? We tried your rhythm therapy here, and it worked even better. I told them about you. They call it the Atri protocol now." She froze, breath catching, as he continued, "We'll meet again soon. Maybe under a different sky, but I'll bring the laughter, you bring the calm." For a moment she stood motionless, then smiled, the soft gold of hope spreading through her gills. She whispered to the empty room, "We will finish the rhythm together." The stars outside pulsed like distant heartbeats answering her call, and she knew that even across the light years their connection continued. Part science, part friendship, and all trust, built from a misunderstanding that became a bridge between worlds. A new oath for the Starborn Clinic. The cycle of seasons on Starborn Station 8 was measured not by weather, but by the rhythm of traffic through its corridors, the hum of engines docking, the echo of steps along the polished floors. It had been almost half a year since Mason's shuttle left for Earth, and the clinic had changed more than anyone could have predicted. The Harmony Protocol, now renamed the HFY Protocol, had spread across a dozen colonies and was being studied by the best minds in the Alliance. Yet HFY herself kept no pride for the name. She only wanted the work to live its purpose every morning. She walked the same route from the observation deck to the central ward, greeting nurses and doctors of 6 different species. She had trained herself to notice small things: the tone of a monitor, the rhythm of breath in the recovery bay, the way laughter echoed softer now that her human partner was gone. She missed him in quiet ways. She would find herself saying a phrase he once used or turning toward a sound, thinking it was his laugh when it was just a monitor chirping. But she had learned something from that emptiness. The rhythm of connection was not bound to presence. It was carried by memory and meaning. When she worked with a frightened patient, she remembered his steady voice when she led a new team through triage. She used the same warmth he once used to calm her, and slowly she realized that Mason's laughter had not vanished. It had become part of the station's sound, the background music of courage. One morning, the chief medic entered her office carrying a datapad with the Earth insignia. He said, "Message from the Terran Medical Council. They have invited you to Earth to present the protocol yourself." She blinked, stunned. The chief continued, "They want the founder, not the report. It seems your human friend has made sure they know your name." Her gills shimmered pale gold. She whispered, "He always said we would meet under a different sky." The chief smiled. "That sky is waiting for you, Nurse HFY." The journey to Earth was long, a chain of jumps across gates older than most civilizations. She spent the trip studying human language again, wanting to perfect her phrasing and learn idioms. Mason had once used the first sight of Earth, took her breath away, the blue and white sphere alive with motion. She had seen oceans on her home world, but never like this, alive with storms and sunlight. When the shuttle landed in the capital, she stepped out to a sea of sound, laughter, shouting, wind, all strange and beautiful. She was greeted by Mason waiting at the ramp, his face brighter than she remembered, his uniform marked with Earth and Starborn emblems. He said, "You took your time." And she replied calmly, "Perfection requires patience." They both laughed, and the moment felt like the completion of a long-held breath. The days that followed were full of meetings and presentations, halls crowded with humans, aliens, and hybrids from across the Alliance. HFY stood before them, speaking in measured words about empathy, rhythm, and shared emotion. Mason assisted, translating subtle Solari concepts into human metaphors together. They demonstrated the pulse and harmony technique, and the council chamber filled with calm energy. Scientists measured it. Skeptics questioned it, but no one could deny the results. By the end of the session, the assembly voted to adopt the HFY protocol as standard practice for interspecies crisis response. The applause that followed was not thunderous, but deep and steady, like the heartbeat of unity. After the ceremony, they returned to the quiet of the old observation dome overlooking the ocean city below. HFY looked at the waves moving in endless motion. She said softly, "Your world moves fast, Mason, but still it feels familiar." He smiled, because the ocean never changes. He paused, then added, "You know, they offered me a command post on a new research fleet. They want someone to test long-range applications of the protocol in frontier systems." She turned to him. Eyes, "Wide are you going?" He nodded. "But only if you come too. We could build clinics beyond the edge of the Alliance." She hesitated. Duty tied her to the station she had built, but curiosity and purpose pulled her forward. Finally she said, "If the tide carries us together again, then yes, I will go." Weeks later, preparations began for the new mission. The ship, named Horizon's Heart, was fitted with advanced med bays tuned to the harmony fields. Atri trained a team of human and alien medics Mason coordinated. Logistics, every part of the ship carried a signature of what they had learned. Music woven into alarms, soft light rhythms, guiding rest cycles, humor lessons stored in translation files on the eve of departure. They stood in the hangar, surrounded by crew from 10 worlds. Atri addressed them in simple words. We have built bridges from laughter and rhythm. Now we must cross them. Remember, healing begins with understanding and ends with trust. Mason followed, saying, if anyone here ever panics, just remember how this all started. A nurse, a patient, and one very awkward misunderstanding. The crew laughed and the sound rolled through the bay, breaking tension and sealing unity. When the Horizon's heart left orbit, Earth glowed behind them, a blue memory fading into starlight. Mason sat in the cockpit while Atri adjusted the calibration for the med scanners. The ship entered warp, and the stars stretched into rivers of light. He looked at her, saying, ready for the unknown. She answered, always, as long as there is heartbeat, there is rhythm. The journey ahead would take them through uncharted sectors where colonies struggled and ancient ruins whispered of lost civilizations. But they were not afraid. They carried the one thing the galaxy needed most: hope disguised as simple compassion. Months later, their mission logs recorded countless rescues, one on a frozen moon, where laughter thawed fear, another in a storm of radiation, where rhythm steadied hands. Atri became a legend, known as the Nurse of Stars, while Mason was called the Voice of Calm. Yet neither cared for titles. They cared for the lives saved and the friendships born in impossible places. One evening after a long day, Atri sat in the med bay, humming her ocean song. Mason joined her, placing a small recording cube on the table. It played the sound of the first heartbeat they ever stabilized together. She said softly, that was where it began. He said, and this is where it continues. In the end, when history remembered them, it did not begin with their triumph, but with their mistake. The alarm that once rang through a small clinic because a nurse misunderstood a human signal, that mistake became the spark that taught a galaxy the meaning of empathy. From that day forward, every Starborn clinic carried a small inscription at its entrance, written in both human and Solari script. It read, healing starts when we listen, and every patient who entered heard a faint pulse of rhythm in the air, followed by a quiet laugh echoing from the past, the legacy of two souls who turned misunderstanding into harmony and fear into friendship. And in the endless expanse of the stars, their story became not just legend, but the foundation of a new oath. The oath of the Starborn Clinic to heal not only the body but the distance between worlds.